What?
And that's all I have to say about that.
And I'm looking at it now.
How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Luke's Reviews, and on today's video I will be reviewing X-Men Dark Phoenix, which is presumably the final chapter in this Fox-run cinematic universe of the X-Men, because let's face it, the New Mutants, it's not happening. That's been pushed back so many times now that if it does ever get released, I would probably imagine that it will end up on Disney Plus, which is going to be Disney's new streaming service. This thing ain't seeing cinemas. So the question is Dark Phoenix a fitting conclusion to this X-Men story that they started specifically in 2011 from First Class with these set of characters? But I guess you could say since 2000, like this is a wrap up for Fox. This is Fox basically saying goodbye to the X-Men. Is it a fitting conclusion? Huh. So the year is 1992. NASA have launched a spaceship and they are suddenly under attack from a solar flare. The X-Men soar into space to save them, and Jean is left stranded, absorbing what is presumably the Phoenix Force. Jean survives, and this space goo has now amplified her powers to where she has become an uncontrollable and unstoppable force. The X-Men want to stop her, Magneto wants to stop her, and there's also an alien race led by Jessica Chastain who intend to apprehend her. Now, when it comes to the X-Men movies, I'm a huge fan. I've actually never disliked any of them. Don't get me wrong, there are some that are far better than others, like X-Men Days of Future Past, the original X-Men, X-Men 2, they are fantastic movies. If you want to include the spin-offs, like the first Deadpool, Logan, X-Men First Class as well, they're great. You do have lower tier ones, like The Last Stand and Origins, which, I'll be honest, I don't hate them. I know that they're not as good, but I've never disliked them. I just think that they're kind of middle of the road. So I've never actually disliked any X-Men film up until now. I'm not going to waste time with suspense here. I'm not going to prolong whether, oh, was it good, because the trailers didn't make it seem so good and there were a lot of backstage murmurs. Will it actually end up being okay? No, this movie is a car crash. It is such a horrendous mess of a movie that reeks of studio interference and really poorly handled reshoots. For those that aren't aware, Dark Phoenix was filmed quite a few years ago, because I think they estimated to have a release around summer last year, and then that got pushed back until about November of 2018, and then that got pushed back to around February of 2019, and then that got pushed back until summer this year, where now it's been released. And I think Fox got the message like, right, we cannot push it back anymore. We just need to release this thing, because up until that point, Dark Phoenix was getting a lot of scrutiny. There were poor test screenings. The studio wasn't happy with how the film was turning out, so they sent it back for major reshoots. Apparently, the third act, or at least the original plan for the third act, was literally a carbon copy of another final act of a fairly recent superhero film, but that had to be completely restructured and redesigned, so had to refilm all of that. So it really does come of no surprise that it shows every issue that they seem to have had behind the scenes is glaringly obvious. It is chopped together with the grace of a reversing dump truck full of horse manure. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who was even slightly involved with this film that genuinely thought that it was in a fit state to be released in cinemas is a moron. Let's start with the story. Oh boy! The Dark Phoenix is a very classic X-Men tale about Jean Grey, and she discovers these new powers. She has the Phoenix Force embrace her, and in the comics you have the Shi'ar Empire, and they get involved. In this, they completely butcher it. Like, if you think that they did a bad job handling the Dark Phoenix story in The Last Stand, this makes the Last Stand look like they completely nailed it. It is handled so poorly. She's never actually referred to as the Phoenix, apart from one slight cutaway line that Scott gives that all the X-Men kids are calling her. Otherwise, she's just absorbed a bunch of swirly space goo, and that's the extent of her Phoenix that we get. As for the Shi'ar Empire, they're nowhere to be found, and instead we get replaced with Jessica Chastain and a bunch of nameless, completely underwritten, underutilized, and pointless aliens. Wow. I cannot believe how badly they could screw this up. The main issue with the story is that nothing makes sense. It is constantly contradicting each and every scene that it follows. There's no fluidity, there's no through line. It's just a bunch of scenes clumped together. As well as that, there are also some scenes that are utterly pointless, that don't add anything to the film. I can understand not serving the story, but obviously you get some scenes that are more light-hearted in an approach, or are meant to just reward the fans a little bit. There are some scenes that are... there's no point in them being here. There's one scene in particular where Jean goes to visit Magneto, as in an effort to reach out and ask for help. But the scene itself feels so edited, as if to cut bits out to reduce the runtime down to about 1 hour 50, that entire scene serves no purpose other than Jean coming down, crying a bit to Magneto, Magneto asking her a question, the army turning up, and Jean flying away. There's no point to it. The dialogue is so cookie cutter, and there are plot elements set up that then the writers and producers completely forget about along the way. It feels like such a manufactured studio film that is made to order and nothing more. As for the cast, I just feel sad for them. James McAvoy doesn't give a bad performance, but it's clear to see that he's not even bothering to try and hit the highs that he has done in the past. Sheridan and the other young X-Men, they look as if they just desperately want to be elsewhere. Jennifer Lawrence once again delivers every line of dialogue as if she's being held hostage by Fox producers who are just refusing to let her go. Although if you've seen the trailers, and weirdly enough Simon Kinberg was freely willing to let this slip, Mystique isn't in the film a lot. I'll leave it at that. If you've seen the trailers, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because they make no effort to try and hide it. But yeah, Jennifer Lawrence got a wish. She's not in this film all that much. And Quicksilver as well. He's been the highlight of every film he's been in. Days of Future Past, and he was one of the best bits in Apocalypse. Blink and you'll miss him. Pardon the pun, but he's, again, completely wasted. There are 3 singular shining glimmers in this film. They are the only positives I can find within Dark Phoenix. The first is Sophie Turner. I think she does a tremendous job as Jean Grey. I wasn't too sure on her in X-Men Apocalypse, but I think she really does a good job in Dark Phoenix at conveying the anger, the fear that Jean Grey has as all of this power is surging through her. And I thought she really did impress me in this. The second is Nicholas Hoult, who obviously has been in First Class and all the other X-Men films as Beast. He probably gets the most fleshed out arc in this film, aside from Jean, but his character has a lot to do in this film, and it's probably the best we've seen Hoult so far. And finally, it's Michael Fassbender. You could put this dude in a terrible movie. I mean, he has. Look at Assassin's Creed, and yet he's still somehow the best part of that film. Same goes for here. He's in a complete mess of a movie, but he does stand out as someone who is at least trying and giving it his all. I do, however, want to raise one slight quarrel that I've noticed. So, cast your minds back to X-Men First Class. That was in the 1960s, I believe. And then Days of Future Past was in the 70s, X-Men Apocalypse was in the 80s, and Dark Phoenix takes place in the early 90s. I know mutants have superpowers. Do they also have the inability to age? It just sums up the fact Fox have no idea what they're doing. They are literally hitting every panic button whilst they were making this film, whilst screaming, "I don't know what I'm doing!" Story isn't coming together? Screw it. We'll just slap together a really generic third act finale that will bore the audience to tears. The villains aren't panning out the way you hope? Never mind. We'll just keep them nameless, have no motivations whatsoever, and just really bland and uninteresting. We haven't got much of a budget left for visual effects because we spent the majority of it on the reshoots. Don't worry, just have some purpley orange space goo and that will be the Phoenix Force. Yeah, it'll be fine, I'll love it. What about a score? We've got Hans Zimmer. You've got Hans Zimmer, one of the greatest composers probably of all time, alongside John Williams, and you give us one of the most bland, generic superhero scores I think I've ever heard. They don't even use John Ottman's theme, that is one of the most iconic things within all of these X-Men films. That's never used once. What are you doing? Dark Phoenix is horrendous. There's no fluidity, passion, or care. Fox clearly realised that the film was going south halfway through, and rather than stick with their guns, they panicked, retreated, and gave us one of the laziest, messiest superhero movies in recent memory. Honestly, I'd put this on par with Fantastic. Instead of going out with a bang, this X-Men Fox series, it just goes out on a really disappointing whimper. Overall, guys, look, this might be considered generous, considering how much I've ranted on this film. I'm going to give X-Men Dark Phoenix a 2.5 out of 10. So overall, guys, those were my thoughts on X-Men Dark Phoenix. Let me know what you thought of the film in the comments below, as well as I want to know, what movie do you think had the worst studio interference? There are a lot to choose from, and unfortunately it is becoming a sad fact that nowadays films are more focused on being manufactured rather than having creative control. But I want to know, which do you think had the worst sort of studio interference? If you have enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. All the links to my social media accounts are in the description below. Many thanks for watching, guys, and I shall see you in the next video.